Roisin and Mabe Devane ran a boutique in Cork, but beneath the lace and linen, they built a criminal empire. Imir Callan buried her husband and took over his gang without shedding a tear. Sorcha McVeigh ruled Belfast's underworld until betrayal struck from within. Fianna Tolan married into a cartel and played both sides until the truth exploded. These women weren't victims or side characters. They were the masterminds behind Ireland's deadliest crime families. And their story is darker, bloodier, and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. In the quiet outskirts of Cork, nestled between stone fences and modest suburban homes, lived two sisters who appeared to be nothing more than successful boutique owners. Roisin and Mabe Devane ran a high-end fashion store that catered to wealthy clients and tourists. The Devane sisters were stylish, polite, and seemingly charitable, often sponsoring local events and contributing to community causes. But their public image was only a veil. What the townspeople didn't see was that the boutique was the front for one of Ireland's most powerful and invisible crime syndicates. A business they had inherited and expanded from their late father, Seamus Devane. A man once whispered about in pub corners, now long disappeared without a trace. Unlike their father, who relied on brute force and unpredictable allies, the sisters operated with quiet ruthlessness. Roisin was the face of legitimacy, managing legal documents, investments, and international wire transfers. Her smooth demeanor and education made her untouchable in the eyes of the law. Mabe, the younger of the two, was colder. She had no need for pleasantries or false smiles. She ran the enforcement side of their network, maintaining loyalty through intimidation and precision. Her team handled distribution, collections, and cleanup. Together, they operated a criminal enterprise that moved narcotics, firearms, and counterfeit goods across Ireland, the UK, and southern Spain. Their rise wasn't loud or bloody. It was systematic. The sisters used businesses across the country to wash money: bakeries, cafes, online clothing shops, and holiday rental companies. The bookkeeping was handled by Una Donnelly, a former bank analyst who was fired after being implicated in a minor fraud scandal. Shunned from her career, she joined the Devane sisters and used her skills to manipulate financial records, shuffle accounts, and create layers of shell companies that even expert investigators struggled to follow. Una lived a quiet life, never flaunting her wealth, but she had more control over millions than most CEOs. For years, the Devane operation moved in silence. Police knew something was wrong. They saw small-time criminals disappear or reappear as millionaires. But there were no direct links to the sisters. The Devane name never appeared on any lease, deed, or contract. They were ghosts in their own empire, moving through back doors and whisper networks, always 3 steps ahead. Then came the cocaine shipment. The mistake that would unravel everything. It was a high-value load, worth over €8 million, arranged with a Colombian contact and shipped to the port of Kinsale. The deal had been planned for months. Mabe had overseen the transport route herself. Roisin had created the paper trail to cover it. But when their crew arrived to pick it up, the container was missing. In its place were 6 empty barrels and a single bullet casing. The implications were explosive. There were only a handful of people who knew about the shipment, all supposedly loyal. Mabe believed they'd been sold out. Roisin, more calculating, suspected sabotage from within the network. Una began combing through offshore transfers, trying to trace unusual withdrawals. Their criminal partners grew anxious, demanding answers. Tension turned to panic when one of their mid-level distributors was found floating in the River Lee, his hands bound and lips sewn shut. A gruesome message. The sisters faced their first real crisis. For all their control, they had built an empire of shadows, where loyalty was bought, not earned. Someone was challenging them, not just for revenge, but for power. As their empire began to crack from the inside, Roisin and Mabe realized that the war they had avoided for years was now inevitable. And this time, the enemy was not the police or a rival gang. It was someone they already knew. Imir Collin had once been known only as the elegant wife of Ciaran Collin, a notorious gang boss who ruled over Dublin's criminal underground for more than a decade. She hosted lavish dinner parties, raised 2 children in a gated estate, and appeared entirely disconnected from her husband's business dealings. But when Ciaran was shot dead outside a car dealership in broad daylight, Imir didn't collapse in grief. She buried him with a blank expression and stepped into the role he left behind with a calmness that unsettled even his most hardened associates. She didn't announce her leadership. She didn't need to. Within weeks, the men who had circled her husband's throne began reporting to her. She spoke softly, rarely used threats, and never raised her voice. But one by one, those who challenged her disappeared. Some found with clean gunshots to the head, others never found at all. Imir's control wasn't built on fear in the traditional sense. It was built on obligation and secrets. She knew everything. Who had stolen, who had lied, who had betrayed Ciaran in private. She used that knowledge not to punish, but to bind people to her. Those who crossed her didn't just face violence. They were dismantled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. What set Imir apart was her vision. She didn't want to continue her husband's bloody turf wars or reckless drug runs. She wanted structure, discipline, and silence. And she wanted women. She began recruiting them carefully. Wives who had lost their gang-affiliated husbands, girlfriends abandoned by jailed criminals, and even former rivals who were underestimated in their own crews. She called them nothing officially, but on the street. They became known as the Widow's Circle. This new network of women worked with military precision. They handled blackmail operations, high-end fraud, and contract killings with stunning efficiency. Imir avoided drug territory, too messy, too visible. Instead, she focused on control-buying politicians, bribing customs officials, infiltrating finance. Where male leaders flaunted wealth and bravado, Imir and her circle operated like quiet architects, drawing maps of power in invisible ink. One of her closest allies was Clodagh Riordan, a former Garda officer suspended after being falsely accused of tampering with evidence in a corruption case. Disgraced and bitter, Clodagh was recruited by Imir not just for her tactical skills, but for her insider knowledge. She built intelligence networks, using old Garda contacts, feeding real-time surveillance to Imir's operations. With Clodagh by her side, Imir knew who was being watched, what was being planned, and where the weaknesses lay. But success brought attention. When the teenage daughter of a high-ranking detective went missing from her private school in South Dublin, panic erupted. There had been no ransom demand, no signs of struggle, just a vanished girl and a shaken city. What few knew was that the detective had been on Imir's payroll, accepting bribes in exchange for misdirecting internal investigations. But someone had stepped out of line. Someone in the widow's circle had taken the girl without approval. Imir was furious. The disappearance had the potential to unravel everything. While the public speculated about gangs, trafficking rings, and political conspiracies, Imir began her own quiet investigation. She traced the breach back to a newly recruited member who had personal ties to the detective. In one swift move, that woman was eliminated, her body left at the detective's doorstep with nothing but a burner phone beside it. The message was clear. Imir Collin controlled her network with exact precision, and any deviation, no matter how small, would be met with silent, lethal force. But the damage was done. With the detective now unpredictable and the media hovering too close, Imir knew the widow's circle was no longer invisible. For the first time, her empire was brushing against the light, and she could feel the walls tightening. Yet she didn't retreat. She began planning something bigger, something that would make her untouchable, even if the cost was blood. Belfast had long been a breeding ground for gang violence, with turf lines drawn by firebombs and erased by bullets. But few expected Sorcha McVeigh to rise from the chaos. She had started small, collecting debts, running messages, organizing local shipments. But her talent for survival and her gift for making allies in dangerous places elevated her faster than anyone predicted. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy. She didn't command respect with force. She earned it with strategy. When her boss was arrested in a surprise sting, most expected the crew to splinter. Instead, Sorcha stepped forward, not with a power grab, but with solutions. She smoothed over feuds, paid legal fees to keep mouths shut, and doubled the crew's profits within months. No one realized it then, but she wasn't just holding things together. She was building a new machine, one where her control stretched across all corners of the city. Her focus was singular loyalty, and to enforce that loyalty, she created an inner circle that answered only to her. One of her most trusted allies was Dras Dervla Quinns, a fiery enforcer who had once been caught in a police raid as a teenager and never trusted authority again. Dervla handled violence with efficiency. She was known on the streets as the cleaner. Anyone who crossed Sorcha vanished, and Dervla was often the last person they saw. Together, the two women rebuilt the Belfast operation, modernizing it with encrypted phones, front companies, and drone surveillance. They had contacts in Liverpool, deals with Romanians, and silent stakes in shipping companies that smuggled contraband through fishing ports. But Sorcha's ambition wasn't confined to Northern Ireland. She wanted a stake in the southern market and entered a fragile alliance with the Devane sisters in Cork. It was risky, especially since the Devanes trusted no one outside their bloodline. Still, the partnership moved forward, centered around a weapons shipment stored in a warehouse outside Newry. The weapons were meant for resale in mainland Europe. The deal was worth over €5 million. It would mark Sorcha's first step toward becoming a national player. Then, without warning, the warehouse was raided. 3 bodies were found inside, shot execution style, and the crates were empty. Within hours, photos of the crime scene leaked. Fingerprints belonging to Sorcha were discovered on a rifle left behind. The police issued a warrant for her arrest, naming her a key suspect. But Sorcha had never stepped foot in the warehouse. She knew instantly that someone had betrayed her. She suspected a rival gang at first, but when she searched the warehouse's digital logs, she found something chilling. Access codes had been changed hours before the raid, using her private key. The only person who had ever been given that access was Dervla. The betrayal cut deeper than a bullet. Dervla had not only set her up, but she had also aligned herself with Imir Callan and the Widow's Circle. The plan had been in motion for months. Dervla had posed as loyal while feeding details of Sorcha's operations to Imir, helping orchestrate the raid, the murders, and the media leak. It wasn't just about taking Sorcha down. It was about replacing her. Sorcha had no choice but to disappear. She vanished from Belfast entirely, taking only a burner phone, cash, and a few weapons. Her empire collapsed overnight. Dervla stepped into the vacuum, backed by Imir's resources and legitimacy. The Widow's Circle expanded north, absorbing Sorcha's assets and silencing dissenters with terrifying speed. But Sorcha wasn't dead. She was hiding, wounded but plotting. She had no intention of staying gone forever. What Dervla didn't know was that Sorcha had kept a ledger, a record of every deal, every name, every betrayal. If she returned, she wouldn't be looking for forgiveness. She'd be looking for revenge. And she wouldn't stop until Dervla and the women behind her were buried under the ruins they thought they had claimed. Fianna Tolan was never meant to be a criminal. Born in a quiet coastal village near Galway, she was raised in a house that valued silence over questions and appearances over truth. She was beautiful, elegant, and taught early on that charm could open any door. By 23, she had married Raul Santoro, a rising figure in a powerful Spanish cartel. The union was whispered about across Europe, a strategic alliance masked as a whirlwind romance. While tabloids showcased her in designer clothes on yachts, the real work was happening behind the scenes. Fianna wasn't just a trophy wife. She was a key player in cross-border smuggling operations that moved meth, heroin, and firearms through the Atlantic. Using her access to Irish ports and her husband's cartel connections, Fianna built a pipeline through fishing vessels, leisure boats, and private courier services. Her knowledge of the coastline was unmatched. She even recruited fishermen from her hometown with promises of untaxed money and clean records. Her charm was disarming. She never raised suspicions, not from customs agents, nor from politicians who occasionally found themselves at her garden parties. She used her position to bridge two criminal empires, Spain's and Ireland's, without ever appearing in a police file. But Fianna was never content with being a bridge. She wanted her own territory. As her husband grew more involved in cartel politics back in Madrid, she began quietly starting her own operation. Disguised under a wedding planning agency, she trafficked meth hidden in bridal gowns, flower arrangements, and event equipment. She paid off logistics managers and port inspectors, and no one dared to question the shipments from Spain, marked with luxury branding. Her sideline was making her more money than her husband's official routes. Everything changed the day one of her trucks was intercepted outside Limerick. Hidden within a crate of glassware was a package that had broken open during inspection, revealing industrial-grade meth. The container had no visible link to Fianna, but cartel intelligence was sharp. Her husband confronted her, and when she didn't deny it, they made a deal. She could continue to live, but she would now work for them, on their terms. Fianna became a cartel spy. Her new mission was to gather intel on the Devane sisters and the Widow's Circle. The cartel believed Ireland's female-led syndicates were becoming too powerful, threatening to disrupt their supply chains and territorial dominance. Fianna, now under close watch, was forced to infiltrate meetings, pose as an ally, and feed information back to Madrid. She met with Mabe Devane under the pretense of expanding shipping routes. She hosted events that Imir Callan's associates attended. Every conversation, every shipment, every transaction was reported. But the dual life was suffocating. Fianna played her part so well, she began to believe she could manage both sides. She leaked only enough to appease the cartel while shielding her Irish contacts from the worst exposure. It was a dangerous game. The moment of collapse came when one of her side shipments, intended for a Scottish buyer, was intercepted not by customs, but by a splinter group loyal to Sorcha McVeigh. The product vanished. The buyer was murdered, and Fianna was now blamed by both sides. Fearing for her life, she tried to disappear. But by then, she was too visible. Her name had started circulating in secret police investigations, her assets were being frozen, and she was receiving anonymous threats in multiple languages. With nowhere else to turn, she approached an unlikely source, Interpol. In a carefully orchestrated meeting, she agreed to trade information for protection. But her conditions were strict immunity, relocation, and silence. Fianna handed over names, routes, and proof of corruption that reached into both the cartel and Ireland's crime networks. The damage was catastrophic. The betrayal shattered alliances, burned entire trafficking routes, and led to the arrest of key players. But even in witness protection, Fianna knew her safety was temporary. Both sides had long memories. She wasn't just a traitor. She was the woman who had nearly played them all. The downfall of Ireland's most powerful female-led crime networks began with a single name whispered during an encrypted call intercepted by European intelligence agencies. It was part of a multinational operation codenamed Silken Web, an investigation launched quietly after mounting pressure from Interpol, Spanish narcotics units, and the Irish Garda. For years, the authorities had known something large and sophisticated was operating beneath the surface. But they had no faces, no proof. Only rumors of women pulling the strings from the shadows. Fianna Tolan's betrayal changed everything. Her testimony, backed by detailed ledgers, offshore accounts, and a hard drive filled with recorded meetings, ignited a domino effect. The Devane sisters were the first to fall. Roisin Devane was intercepted on a private yacht near the Canary Islands, attempting to flee under a false identity. Authorities recovered cash, forged passports, and a USB drive loaded with financial records. Meanwhile, Mabe Devane refused to surrender. During a raid on a remote safe house in County Clare, she opened fire on the tactical unit, killing one officer before being gunned down in a storm of bullets. The news of her death spread quickly through the underworld, sending a wave of panic across their network. Una Donnelly, the Devane bookkeeper, tried to vanish through a quiet border crossing into Northern Ireland, but was caught within hours. Her arrest unlocked a treasure trove of forensic accounting, revealing years of carefully hidden financial trails. Investigators followed the money to luxury homes in France, bribes to European customs officers, and even campaign donations to Irish politicians. The entire Devane empire unraveled in days. In Dublin, Eimír Callan went silent. Her estate was abandoned, her cars were missing. Her inner circle was disappearing, one by one, either arrested or found dead in what authorities believed were preemptive silencing operations. Clodagh Riordan, the former Garda officer turned security chief, was spotted on surveillance leaving a private airfield in southern France. Within a week, she too was gone. The widow's circle fractured without Eimír's control. The remaining members scattered, some attempting to form smaller groups, others choosing to vanish entirely. But Eimír herself, she left no trace. Dervla Quinn, newly crowned leader of Belfast's criminal underworld, was the next to face the consequences. A tip-off from an anonymous source, rumored to be Sorcha McVeigh herself, led police to an underground bunker used for arms storage. Dervla was arrested while trying to destroy evidence with acid and fire. Unlike the others, she refused to speak during interrogation. She remained stone-faced even as prosecutors presented photos, messages, and audio clips. She knew silence was her only protection. But with her network exposed and her rivals eager to take back control, prison wouldn't keep her safe forever. As the dust settled, the international headlines celebrated the collapse of Ireland's deadliest crime families. But beneath the celebrations was an uneasy truth. This was only the end of one chapter. Just 1 year after the last arrest, a grainy photo surfaced online. It showed a woman strongly resembling Eimír Callan seated at a rooftop cafe in Morocco. Next to her was a woman with similar features to Clodagh Riordan. Though slightly altered by cosmetic surgery, authorities dismissed it as coincidence, but within weeks, subtle signs began to emerge. Encrypted communications between known associates, dormant shell companies suddenly reactivated, and unexplained disappearances in Spain and Portugal. Whispers returned to the streets. Some said the women were rebuilding, laying low and learning from past mistakes. Others believed new factions had formed, even more secretive, even more ruthless. Sorcha McVeigh was never found, but her name resurfaced in prison rumors and border checkpoint alerts. Fianna Tolan, now hidden under a new identity in a witness protection program, lived with the weight of knowing her betrayal had only delayed the inevitable. The war she thought she had ended was merely evolving. And the women behind it all were more dangerous than ever. Because now, they had nothing to lose.